right. Hey everyone, meteorologist Aaron Tuttle with you on your, what day is today? Tuesday. It's your Tuesday lunch update, and we're going to talk about your threat of severe weather coming up for later this afternoon. So thanks for joining me, for liking the video, sharing with their friends and family, telling them about AT's weather, and telling them about my app and all that stuff. So I appreciate that, and of course your support. And what we're going to focus on is for the weather this afternoon. And I'll even take a little sneak peek at what you can expect beyond to see if things actually quiet down for a change. And we'll kind of see what the Storm Prediction Center has to think about that. So I'm glad you guys could join me. And if you watched last night, this will kind of be a continuation of that thought process, and we'll see if anything's changed significantly or if we're pretty much still on track to see some isolated storms this afternoon. So let's go ahead and jump on into what I have for you. All right. So first thing I want to go ahead and get out of the way is the overall trend with time. So we've got severe storms expected for today across a good chunk of the Central Plains. All right, tomorrow we do have some across Texas and far southeast Oklahoma and Arkansas, even a little bit up here in the Northeast. But then after that, Thursday's looking pretty good, and Friday's what I love to see. Predictability too low. And that's for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and even Tuesday. Let's bring it into this nonsense. So anyway, so that's a look at your extended severe weather threat for right now. Could it change? Sure. But right now, as far as what the model data is showing, that is the way things look. Now, today what we have here is a dry line setting up out here across western Oklahoma. So it's kind of basically in a line like this. So it's not too far from central Oklahoma. It kind of curls back here to the southwest, and it'll get more defined as we go through time. In other words, these winds out of here become more southwesterly, and then these will become a little bit more south-southeasterly, so we'll get a good convergence line across it, and temperatures are already warming up here lunchtime into the lower 80s. Now, the sounding forecast for today, take it from this morning, indicates we'll need to hit about 85 degrees, 86 degrees for the cap to break. That's pretty toasty. And that's a stretch in this environment. So the Weather Service, because of that, is going to take a couple of extra soundings, one here at lunchtime, and then one again this middle of this afternoon to see how the cap looks, if it still is going to be required to hit that high temperature. Looking at the satellite picture, we're already starting to see some development down here in southwest Oklahoma and some enhanced Q field here across that convergence zone with the dry line. So that tells me we won't have to probably get that warm to break the cap. So in other words, there's a lot of lift in the atmosphere already ongoing. Even at lunchtime, we hadn't even hit the peak heating day in the afternoon. So I think things are setting up to where we are going to get a few thunderstorms out of this, and they will be severe, producing some damaging wind and hail and all that kind of stuff. So here's a look at the Storm Prediction Center for today, and you can see it's anchored here across parts of Oklahoma. Let me zoom this in a little bit more for you. So you can see the enhanced risk does come down into central Oklahoma. Also, what you're going to notice is the tornado threat, which is here in brown, is on the 5% ring down here in the central Oklahoma, but much higher across Kansas and parts of Missouri for later on this afternoon. Now, the big threat for us is going to be hail outside of the slight tornado risk. And that hail risk is for some significant size hail across most of central northern Oklahoma, wherever these storms track and form. Remember, not everybody's going to see them. It's just going to be a few of them. But that is the general area, and the hail is even larger, of course, farther up north. So more hail reports are expected up there. So that's a breakdown on how the overall severe weather looks like for this event. So there's a big leniency toward the hail size versus anything else. Now the Weather Service kind of zooms in on that, shows you the moderate risk here, enhanced risk I should say, across central Oklahoma. That stretches on up to Tulsa and of course all of northeastern Oklahoma, surrounded by a slight risk out here to the south and west. Don't get bogged down though in the exact areas of the risks. Just so you know, storms can sometimes happen outside of these areas of the risks, and they can be just as potent as the ones in the middle of the risk. These are just kind of like the best parameters come together in these areas. Doesn't mean the weather always cooperates that way. It's just kind of that's how things work out. Okay, so let's talk about how things should evolve. Now, if you notice in the Texas Tech model last night, we used it. It showed basically two areas of storms. It had a couple breaking up down here and a couple breaking up down here. Well, now it's got a couple breaking up here. So it's actually kind of late to the party here as far as the outcome goes, but it still keeps the general premise, which is isolated supercell thunderstorms developing along the dryline axis and then moving through the I-35 corridor and then in eastern Oklahoma once we head into the evening hours. and we can still get some new development, beyond this period. So our window really starts from around 4 o'clock this afternoon, really probably about through 9 o'clock as far as that kind of a threat goes. Then things should quiet down pretty quickly. Now, some of the things we have to look for in our area, I'm going to zoom in here, and I'll show you why I think we should not have a problem breaking the cap. For one is we have a lot of convergence, a lot of lift along the dry line. That's this hot spot here you see in the color areas. That's for 700 millibars. So that's one ingredient that you need to get that kind of stuff going. Now in the upper levels of the jet, we actually have a split flow. We have it looks like a Y or V pattern here. So that creates an enhanced area of lift in the atmosphere. So that's positive to get some storms to develop. At 500 millibars, we do have a storm center, which is basically in central Colorado. And we're kind of on the tail end of the energy associated with that kicks out. So not a whole lot of lift with this, but just very subtle, very light, slightly positive, so not overly crazy. And then at the surface, well, of course, we mentioned we got the dry line out place, and so we have all of our warm, moist atmospheric conditions here across a good area of the state. East of that dry line into the low 70s, whereas dew points in the 40s, 30s, and 20s west of the dry line. Again, if you don't know what the dry line is, it just separates moist air from dry air. And we have a good theta E axis where we got the instability kind of rushing up against that boundary. So we got a lot of things here at the surface and how things ought to evolve. The question is temperatures out there. The models had only us into the mid to upper 70s. In some areas of central Oklahoma, close to 80. So they're actually behind the curve a little bit on how temperatures actually currently even are. So I'm going to disregard this cooler outcome and go with the slightly warmer. And because of that, this model actually really doesn't even produce a whole lot of precipitation, which I've actually used this model quite a bit for the spring for our outcome. It's done fairly well. But today I think it's going to bust. I don't think this is going to be an accurate representation. Then actually keeps things pretty quiet here across most of Oklahoma. It does fire off some stuff up here in northeast Oklahoma around 7 o'clock, and a couple of storms there in southwest Oklahoma, and that moves through central Oklahoma around midnight, and that's about it. And even those really aren't all that out of control, so it's fairly quiet. So I'm going to ignore this model which I've used, and you're asking, well, how do you know which one to use? You go off of, you go off of just historic things, how the models performed in the past, what you think should happen, and you look for a model that goes what your line of thought is, and this does not go with my line of thought, so I just throw it out. Let's see. Here's a look at the forecast from that model just to show you that the wind shear here is plenty conducive for producing tornadoes. It actually even has a tornado indicator as far as the hazard type right here. And it's going for the strength of a tornado historically probably around an EF2, possibly an EF3 at most. Again, that's on the strong side, but these are just guidelines and they may or may not ever pan out. So don't pay so much attention to those. These are just kind of, we'll see. But it does have some large hail with similar type setups. Here's a hail in a similar case of around 4 inches in diameter. So we could have some big hail today. It does have a little bit of a cap here, but this is assuming temperatures don't get into the mid 80s. So that's why this model is not producing precip, because it stops at about 79 degrees and doesn't hit that convective temperature. But like we said, I think that'll actually be an error. Here's a look at some high resolution cam models, and they produce some storms, as you can see bubbling up here across this is the I-35 corridor right here. So I basically say I-35, we can go plus and minus, about 30, 50 miles, just take your preference. But that's the I-35 corridor. So when you hear that in writing or hear that in speak, that's what the reference is. And this will all kind of fire along the eastern side of this dry line out here in the west, and then they'll move to the northeast wherever they do form. Now, are the models exactly right on the placement? No, not at this point in time. You would need a much shorter window for that, and we're still several hours, but kind of gives you the idea. It is focusing part of these storms over central Oklahoma. And then this other high resolution model I like to use, the CAM model, also produces kind of a similar outcome, but they struggle against the cap. They try to get going here in the mid-afternoon at the 4 o'clock hour, and then 5 and 6 and 7, they kind of fizzle. and they really don't do a whole lot. We have a new development that comes around midnight, central Oklahoma, and that moves out to the east. So this model shows we're kind of in we're split at 50-50. It's going a little stronger cap, therefore these storms have a tough time getting rooted in the boundary layer, which means that reduces the potential for tornadoes. You can keep some of the hail potential with that, not as extreme when you get an elevated storm, but that's just kind of what this model is suggesting that they're fighting. If they can't do that, then they typically die out. So we saw that happen many times this storm season. And then lastly, I'll just show you the tornado parameter index for this evening is anchored here across central, southern, northeastern Oklahoma to Kansas, but all the really stronger values are up here to the north into Kansas. There's some pockets here, but these values are much weaker than what we've seen in these prior cases that we've had to deal with. So hopefully this is a good sign that if a tornado were to happen, it would be on the weaker end. Now, as far as breaking the cap, this is the ensemble model, which does seem to think that's going to happen, and it started to do that last night. I think by the time I signed off last night, it wasn't all the way in. It was just starting to kind of indicate that. And then here's a look at it here for this afternoon and evening, and it does show these little storms moving through central Oklahoma through the late afternoon and evening hours, so drive time, for your commute home. Tulsa looks like things, same kind of deal. Your drive time could be affected as they do have some storms moving through. And they kind of keep going off and on through midnight and then kind of finally winding down and moving out of here by daybreak. So it produces quite a bit more activity in general terms. And the last thing I want to show you is the we'll call it the max updraft helicity. So in this particular case, you're going to see this a lot sometimes posted on the internet or on television channels and whatever it is the case may be. And they're going to be looking at this particular product, which is the updraft helicity product, which shows tracks. And these tracks, and let me bring this in bigger, by the way. So pop this up, and then we're going to turn you loose for the rest of your day. Okay, so these tracks zoomed in here. Again, this is Oklahoma City, and this is Tulsa. And they do have some long tracks with them, which indicates mesocyclone activity. Now, how you translate that is, in an environment that's favorable for large hail, then you would track these as hail paths. In an environment that's favorable for tornadoes, that can include sometimes tornado paths. In other words, it gives the idea as to how long-lasting a mesocyclone can produce that type of severe weather. So it doesn't always mean tornadoes. It could easily mean these are just indicating there's going to be some large swaths of hail. But now in a tornado environment like today, I would assume it does indicate some potential for tornadic activity. Now, is it going to be exact on the placement? No. But it just kind of gives you an indicator that likely that's going to be the outcome here for today. So some large hail with a couple of these storms producing tornadoes. That's how you would interpret that data. And that is it. Okay, so I just gave you the synopsis. So if you're joining late, a quick recap here for lunchtime is we are expecting the dry line to fire off a couple of thunderstorms, and those will be supercell type storms. They will struggle against the cap, but some of them should be able to break it and survive. And if they do, which I think they will be producing some large hail, pretty decent in size. We're probably talking well over a golf ball, and you might have a road baseball out there, but it could be some large hail. Damaging winds is typical of these storms, up to 58 miles per hour is the criteria. And then, yes, there'll probably be a couple of tornadoes. The favorite areas right now, anywhere along the I-35 corridor, north and south. Typically the cap is weaker up north. That's usually a favorite area. Once you get max heating, that can help overcome the cap, and that would be over, south central or central Oklahoma. So there are some favorite areas the models do highlight, and that does include Oklahoma City metro region, does include Tulsa also for late afternoon and evening hours. So those are some areas we'll be watching for the rest of the state today. So that is a look. So go about your business, but stay weather aware and keep an eye on the sky if you head up home to work. Just make sure you're not going to drive in any storms. So use my weather app, AT's Weather to Go. Take a look at the radar on it. Make sure you're not about to drive home into something, and it can avoid a storm should there be one coming your direction. It again alerts you if there's a tornado potential with it. It's got little vectors on there. You can click the little ends of the arrows and pop up a box, and it'll tell you what's in the storm. If it's got hail, it'll tell you what size. It'll even do storm tracks for you if you tap the box itself. So it does a lot of stuff, and again, it's free. It's called AT's Weather to Go, Apple and Google Play. And of course, I'll be broadcasting live should there be a threat for tornadoes. Now, if it's just going to be a hail event, I probably won't be, because I usually just focus on tornadoes. So if I see one that looks like it's about to, or is going to, or is so, then that's usually when I come on live, and I'll cover those. Anything else I can think of? I think that's about it. You guys know the same, song and dance here. So this is our who knows what verse we're on, but I'll be glad when it all kind of comes to an end. But storm season around here, we usually say, is mid-March to mid-June, and we usually peak in mid-May. And so now we're heading into the late part of May, so we're going to get off our peak axis, and historically, climatologically speaking, things tend to calm down rather quickly, and we kind of shift to more of a squall line type deal, which is still severe weather, but it's usually more pockets of hail, but more wind driven. And then, of course, some heavy rainfall, which could lead to flash flooding. That's another key I didn't mention here, is the potential for flash flooding. Any of these storms, especially that train over the same area, you're going to have to deal with that. And we've seen some ridiculous amounts. Matter of fact, this model here, this is the ensemble, and it's got up to around 2 in purple. Red is 3 to 4 inches. So it's dumping out a lot of rainfall the next 24 hours, right over central and northeastern Oklahoma. Of course, over areas that do not need any more water. But that's just the way it's going to be, I'm afraid. So I'll have to deal with some more of that flash flooding here for this storm system. All right. Well, hey, you guys, be careful the rest of your afternoon. The Weather Service will be launching some additional soundings, and we'll have an idea as to whether or not that cap will break. And if there's any certainty one way or the other, I can update you accordingly. Otherwise, we'll talk again soon. All right. Take care, everybody.